We are FBC Summit, leading everyday people to love Jesus and make Him known. Thank you so much for joining us today. Here's our pastor, Dr. Larry LeBlanc.
Please take your Bibles and turn with me to Romans chapter 1, verse 20. While you're turning to Romans chapter 1, verse 20, I'd also ask you to buckle your seatbelt. This morning, the Lord has challenged us with one of the most incredible topics that we could ever address, and that is His existence. Last week, we began a two-part mini-series as we are now talking about what it looks like to defend our faith, to have an apologetic and be able to defend the faith that we profess. Last week, part 1, we looked at the moral reasons of why atheism is irrational. This morning, I'm going to challenge you to think critically about why scientifically atheism is irrational. And so as you're taking just a moment to turn there and find Romans 1:20, I want you to imagine that Johnny walked out of his bedroom one morning and he walked into the kitchen. And as he walked into the kitchen, he looked on the kitchen counter and he saw a box of alphabet cereal that was sitting on the kitchen counter. And he noticed that beside the box of cereal, that he looked down and he saw the words, "Take out the garbage, Mom," written with the alphabet cereal. And he looked down at it and Johnny said, "Oh, well, I can explain this. I've been taking high school biology. There's no doubt in my mind what must have happened. Accidentally, the alphabet cereal must have been knocked off the top of the refrigerator. It must have bounced and then landed here on the kitchen table. And after having landed on the kitchen table, it must have spilled out. And randomly, these letters must have fallen out of the alphabet cereal box. And randomly, they must have arranged themselves into these words. And randomly, it just happens to look like it says, 'Take out the garbage, Mom.'" Now, how ridiculous does that sound to some of you sitting in here? It's the same ridiculous argument that high school and college professors are giving our children every single day. But what I will display to you today is that that example is actually more credible than the pseudoscience that has been slammed down our throats and into our brains over the last 40 years. Stand with me and let's read together what God has to say about His own natural revelation. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, His existence, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." God, I pray today that You would make clear that not only do You exist, but our reasons for faith come not only from the Bible, but from good science. In Jesus' name, amen. Please be seated. Someone were to ask you, what is the most important verse in the Bible, what would you say? If we took that poll question today, what is the most important verse in the Bible? Now, a lot of people may say John 3:16, some may say the 23rd Psalm. I want to submit to you today that the most important verse in all of Scripture is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Because if you take Genesis 1:1 to heart and you believe Genesis 1:1, then everything else you're going to read from Genesis 1:2 all the way to Revelation 22 is not going to be hard to believe at all. If you believe Genesis 1:1, then it excludes atheism, it excludes polytheism, it excludes materialism, and it excludes evolution, all in that one verse. So, we are going to ask some fundamental questions about our existence this morning. And the first one is this: where did we come from? Where did we come from? There are only two possibilities for anything that exists. For anything that exists, there's only two possibilities. Number one, either it has always existed, it has existed eternally, or two, something caused it to exist. It had a beginning. So if everything is either caused, the law of causality, or it's eternal, then we have to ask the question, when we look around Romans 1:20 and we see all the things from nature that have been clearly seen being understood from what has been made, then we must ask the question, if there is no God, if there's no God, then why is there something rather than nothing at all? If there is no God, then why does anything exist? Either no one created nothing, or else someone created something out of nothing. So, what's going to drive us today is the fundamental philosophic question, which drives the scientific question: did we create man? Did God create man? Or did man create God? Now, there are a lot of arguments that can be used for this. We looked at the moral argument last week. There are several arguments from science that can be made as well. The cosmological argument is a strong argument, but because we just have a limited amount of time today, we are going to spend our time talking about the teleological argument. Everybody say teleological. Don't you feel smart? You can walk out of church today, and when you go to sit down at lunch and you ask your friends or family that go other places, you can say, well, what'd y'all talk about at church today? And you can say, we talked about the teleological argument. Simply put, let me just put a parenthesis if you're taking notes. That's the argument from design. The teleological argument is the argument from design, and it goes like this. Every design has a designer. The universe has highly complex design. Therefore, the universe had a designer. You see that on the notes, but let me give that to you again. Every design had a designer. The universe has a highly complex design. Therefore, the universe had a designer. So let's just start simple and then we'll work up. This watch, my wife gave this to me upon our engagement. I gave her a fantastic diamond ring and she gave me this. This is one of my prized possessions, and it has a lot of meaning. Now, when you see this watch, if you look at it, it's a Swiss Army watch. It's silver. Everyone can see it from here. You have one of two things to believe. You either believe that some engineer, some watchmaker sat down and they designed this watch. They cut out what needed to be cut out. They placed the working parts inside of it, and they made it. Or you have to believe that this watch is a product of accident. I don't know, maybe a tornado hit a junkyard and this is what came out of it. Some of you are laughing right now, but the ridiculousness of that argument is even less ridiculous than the argument of evolution. If you were on a ship, on a whaling cruise to see whales, and you stood upon the ship, and as you were going out of harbor, you had a conversation, and someone said to you, boy, the design of this ship is fantastic. It's amazing that this ship is able to float. It's amazing that this ship can take on the sea. It's amazing how we can move about on this ship and the propulsion of this ship. And as they're talking about the beautiful design of the ship, you break into the harbor and all of a sudden the whales are spotted. And you look down at the whales and they're right beside the boat and they're going beside the boat. And the same person that talked about the beauty and the design of the ship looks down at the whales and they look at the whales and they say, wow, what an incredible accident. If you can believe that a watch has a designer and a ship has a builder, how is it that you can look at creation and call it an accident? So let's talk first about our biosphere. That's the world that we live in. I just want to give you some evidences today, and we're going to talk about the world that we live in. First of all, when you look at our world, we ask the initial question, what is the first cause? What was the initial cause? Where did the matter and energy come from? If the material universe is eternal, as some claim that it is, what set it in motion? By the way, what energy source keeps it going? How does the law of cause and effect apply? Why is it not devolved as the law of entropy suggests that everything does? Now, in case you were just wondering today, you thought, well, maybe it could be. Maybe it could be just an accident that took place over time and chance. Let's talk about the percentages that it takes for you to be able to live through this worship service. You ready? Our world is made up of 21% oxygen in our atmosphere. If it was 25%, fires would erupt spontaneously and we would burn up. If it was 15% oxygen, we would suffocate. Our atmosphere is the exact right transparency as well. If it were more transparent, we would burn up from the solar radiation. If it was less transparent, we would burn up. If it was more transparent, then we would have far too much. The Earth and the Moon, the gravitational interaction between the Earth and the Moon. If we had greater gravitational effects between the Earth and the Moon, the tide would be so large that it would make the Earth uninhabitable. If we had less gravity, it would make climate instability so much that it would prevent life. The CO2 in our atmosphere, if we had higher, it would burn up. If it were lower, plants couldn't maintain photosynthesis and we would suffocate. If gravitational force were altered by even a fraction of 1%, our sun would not exist. Centrifugal force of the planets, the expansion of the universe, the speed of light, if it was altered by even a few feet per second, life would not be possible. Water level in the atmosphere. If Jupiter, right now, if Jupiter were not in its current course, we would be destroyed by asteroids. When you look at the Earth's tilt, it's exactly 23 degrees. Any more, any less, life would be inhabitable. If the Earth took any longer than 24 hours to rotate on its axis, the climates of the world would not be inhabitable either. If we had more lightning, fire would destroy everything in the world. If we had less lightning, there wouldn't be enough nitrogen in the soil for you to be able to live. If we had more seismic activity, earthquakes, then the entire world would open up into caverns and would be eaten up by the seismic activity. If we had less seismic activity, not enough nutrients would come out of the soil and go into the ocean and into the river runoff. Now, I gave you that about as fast as I could give you that. Those are just some stated scientific facts that we have to be within parameters that are within fractions, even trillions of percentage points for you to even live through this worship service. So what are the chances of the ones I mentioned and another 122 biosphere constants that have to take place? What are the chances that those things could happen randomly? Here's the chance. 1 over 10 to the 138th power. You say, well, Larry, I'm not good at math. Maybe that is possible. You wonder how many atoms are in the universe? 1 over 10 to the 70th power. There is less chance that those atmospheric constants could be taking place by accident than there are 1 over every atom in the universe times 2. That's the possibility that our biosphere or that our world operates by accident. But let's take it a little larger. Y'all want to take an even larger view? Not just the world, but let's talk about the universe for just a moment. But before we get to the universe, let's talk about the Milky Way galaxy that we live in. Just in the Milky Way, there are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And the average distance between them is 30 trillion miles. You say, how far is that? Good question. A spaceship, when it leaves the atmosphere, travels at 17,000 miles an hour. It's pretty fast. So if you were able to start at our sun traveling at 17,000 miles an hour, how long would it take you to get to the next closest star? Anybody want to take a guess? 201,000 years. At 17,000 miles an hour from our sun to the next star, traveling at 17,000 miles an hour, it would take you over 200,000 years to get there. And by the way, if we just expanded out, not just the Milky Way galaxy, but the universe, the number of stars in the universe is approximately equal to all of the grains of sand on every beach in the world. Is our God getting big enough for you? Are you beginning to see that Psalm 19:1 didn't lie? The heavens declare the glory of God. Do you wonder why astronaut John Glenn could look out at all of this and all he could remark was, to look at this kind of creation and not believe in God, to me, is impossible. That's what John Glenn said. The evidence is overwhelming, but yet we take it for granted. But you say, Larry, we've talked about the world, we've talked about the galaxy, we've even expanded out and talked about the universe, but what about life? Because isn't that where it really gets nitty-gritty? Isn't that where the biologists and the scientists, they talk about life? Yes, if you could somehow prove that life could emerge on its own, then evolution might have a leg to stand on. So that's something we have to spend a little time on and we have to address. Before even discussing the impossibilities of macroevolution. Now, I use that term and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, but if you're a Christian and ask whether or not you believe in evolution, the answer is actually yes, I do believe in evolution. But you need to qualify what type of evolution they're talking about. There's two forms of evolution. There is microevolution and macroevolution. For the sake of quick argument and so you can understand what we're talking about, macro or large-scale evolution, that is the argument that you came from a single-cell amoeba that came from nothing. And it evolved from somehow into a starfish and somehow into a reptile and somehow into a bird and somehow into a monkey. And then finally from the goo to the zoo to you became a human being. Right? That's macroevolution. We don't believe in that. Microevolution is that there can be adaptations between species, i.e. Darwin's finches, i.e. different breeds of dogs. That there can be adaptations within a single species, but never once in the history of biology is there proof of any transitional forms, one species becoming another species. But let's just, before we even get to that, because I've put the cart before the horse a little bit, let's back up a little bit. Where did life actually come from? Life forming on its own is a mathematical impossibility. Let me explain to you why. When Darwin's theory of evolution came out in 1859, the belief is that all the scientific discoveries would confirm Darwin. But if they are intellectually honest, they will tell you that not one scientific discovery has confirmed Darwin's theory. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered what is known today as deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. It is the chemical that encodes instructions for building and replicating all living things. It has a helical structure that looks like a twisted ladder, and the information found in just the cell nucleus of a one-celled amoeba, which, by the way, an amoeba, you could line several hundred of them up and they wouldn't be 1 inch long. But the information contained in just the cell nucleus of a one-celled amoeba has enough information that it would be 1,000 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. That is in a single one-celled, the nucleus of the amoeba. So you say, Larry, it's early, I hadn't had my second cup of coffee, all this is just way over my head. So I like to kind of break it down. Any of you ever seen a picture of Mount Rushmore? Back to the alphabet cereal. Anybody that goes to Mount Rushmore and stood beside Mount Rushmore and they tapped their wife on their shoulder and said, "Would you look at that?" And she said, "I know, honey, isn't it breathtaking?" And you said, "Yes, can you believe that after millions of years of natural processes, that wind and erosion had the ability to carve out faces that look exactly like 4 of our presidents? I've never seen such an incredible accident. I've never seen something so amazing to believe that accidentally over the course of time, and don't you think that looks just like Teddy Roosevelt? Your wife would look at you and she would say, "You're a fool, because the fool says in his heart there is no God." Obviously, someone designed it. Obviously, engineers were brought in. Obviously, thousands of workers. Obviously, thousands of pounds of dynamite. Obviously, chisels and scaffolding. And years took place to just place that on the side of a mountain. Now, what if I told you that a single-celled amoeba is millions of times more complicated than Mount Rushmore? Yet somehow we are to believe that it came together in a primordial soup. If a single-cell organism is more complicated than Rushmore, then the conclusion is obvious. But even if scientists have the chemicals, they can't combine them to form a single DNA molecule, much less life. They can't even do it. You can't even give them the chemicals and them make the life. But let's just say they could. Let's say that next week they say, they got Brother Larry. They designed a single-cell organism from the chemicals. Not only would they have to have the chemicals, but it would actually prove the existence of God. Why? Because it wasn't that they took the chemicals and that they all just randomly came together. It would be that brilliant, intelligent scientists took them and placed them together in the proper, exact order so that life could form. Even if brilliant scientists could make a single-cell organism in a laboratory with the chemicals, which they can't, what it would prove is that it took intelligence to make it. Are you tracking? Are y'all tracking with me here? The evidence is so strong for creationism that you say, well, Larry, but I've taken biology, I've taken science, and they tell me that if we gave it enough time and enough chances that it could happen. Let's say we run an airplane this afternoon, and we take the airplane up, and we take a bunch of confetti with us. What colors y'all think we ought to take? I'm the one doing this, so we'll pick the colors I want to pick. Red, white, and blue. We're going to take red, white, and blue confetti, and we're going to stuff the whole airplane full of red, white, and blue confetti. And then we're just going to take off somewhere over the continental United States. And at some point, we're going to drop the hatch, and we're going to drop the confetti outside the airplane. Now, what are the chances that every piece of that confetti, if dropped over the United States, would land in your yard? But not only land in your yard, but perfectly form the American flag in your yard. What are the chances of that happening? It's a better chance of that happening mathematically than a single-cell organism coming into its own existence. But you say, Larry, you haven't answered the question. You said, what about if we took more time? Okay. Well, if you go by that theory, then let's take the airplane up another 10,000 feet and drop the confetti out. It'll have more time. Is that going to give it a better chance to form the American flag perfectly only in your yard? Well, what if we dropped the confetti out of the airplane 1,000 times? Would that give it a better chance of forming perfectly an American flag in your yard? Are you beginning to see how ridiculous some of this is as we begin to form an understanding of the obvious evidences of God? Since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities have been clearly seen from what is made, so that men are without excuse. The chance of one protein molecule, that is not a single-cell organism, that is just a protein molecule, has about 100 amino acids in it. The chance of one forming by chance is the same as a blindfolded man finding one marked grain of sand in the Sahara Desert 3 times in a row. It's like believing. In fact, I would challenge some of you students that when you go into a science class and you are taught macroevolution, you should raise your hand and you should ask this question. I mean, you're probably going to get kicked out of school, but I still think you should ask it. Oh, so you believe, I'm just clarifying. So, Professor, you believe that the Library of Congress was formed because a printing shop exploded. A printing shop explosion forming perfectly the books in the Library of Congress has a better chance than a single-cell organism forming outside of intelligent design. If you were to take 100 blind people and they were each to make 10 moves with 5 different Rubik's Cubes. The chances of them all 5 coming up with perfect 5 Rubik's Cubes solved is the same chance of that happening. You know, to give it any of you that are in literature right now, to take just a move from science for a bit, some of you have been assigned Shakespeare. I want you to think about that if we were to have 1,000,000 monkeys and we had 1,000,000 typewriters, and we gave 1,000,000 monkeys 1,000,000 typewriters, and we gave those 1,000,000 monkeys 1,000,000 typewriters, and we gave them 1,000,000 years. And every monkey was going to live 1,000,000 years, and every monkey was going to hit at that typewriter. What are the chances that even in 1,000,000 years, even with 1,000,000 typewriters, that one of those monkeys would perfectly write Hamlet? Random accident does not explain complex design. By the way, your brain, even the one of you in here that is a few French fries short of a Happy Meal, the slowest person in here, the one whose elevator doesn't go all the way to the top, even you, your brain has enough information in it to fill up 20 million volumes. That's the number of books that right now are in the world's largest libraries. That's in your brain. Yet somehow we are going to get a design, a perfectly ordered design from chaos. So what about evolution? Because that is the predominant not only theory, but it's taught now as law. What about evolution? I like what Ron Carlson said. He said, as a child, I was told that a frog turning into a princess was a fairy tale. I got to the university and they taught me that a frog turning into a princess was a fact. We mentioned the difference in macro versus micro evolution. So let's just talk about certain bodily processes that cannot be reduced. Blood clotting, cell propulsion, vision. So let's just take vision. Have any of you in here ever looked through a telescope? If you've ever seen a telescope or even know the rudimentary designs of a telescope, you would never look at a telescope and say, this is an amazing accident. I can't believe that this thing just got here without anybody thinking about it or building it or creating it or designing it. If you would think that about a telescope, then why not the human eye? The human eye is an interesting study all on its own because it can't have developed over time. An eye cannot evolve, and here's why. A partial eye is useless. It's not that you're going to have less vision, it's that you will have no vision at all because it needs every part of the eye to operate perfectly. It's the same reason why nobody ever asked this question. We hear in biology about these intermediary forms. You know how a reptile evolved into a bird? But that is absolutely not possible because if a reptile lost its scales but somehow then developed partial feathers, it would not be a reptile and it wouldn't be a bird. So it wouldn't be able to function as a reptile and it wouldn't be able to function as a bird. The species would die out during the intermediary forms. But let's just put that on hold for just a moment. Because when we go back to the human eye, what we begin to see is that it is so incredible that the human eye alone has brought converts from atheism to scientific, to understanding the true design argument. A man by the name, he's a Harvard graduate and a PhD from MIT. He's a medical doctor named Ming Wang, and he has performed over 55,000 cataract and LASIK procedures. He grew up as an atheist, but was converted to theism, and he believes that your human body, the human eye alone, is evidence enough to convince you that there is a creator. You say, but wait a minute, Larry, I've got a biology textbook. And when I open that biology textbook, it's got these graphs, these real colorful graphs in it. And it shows like the cell turning into something, and then it keeps moving along, and I keep flipping the pages, and then there's this monkey, and then the monkey's standing a little more upright, and a little more upright, and a little more upright. And then there's a guy, and it kind of looks like a man, but he's got like hair all over his body, and he's kind of hunched over, and his face is kind of smushed up together. And then the next one, it looks like a human being. And the chart looks fantastic. I don't argue with you that it's good artwork. The problem is, since 1859, there is not one transitional form that has ever been proven. Not one traditional form. But one of the greatest arguments from evolutionists that they make is that we all share similar DNA. That there is similar DNA between a monkey and a human being, even between a fish and a human being. So because we share some similar DNA, it must mean we all came from the same puddle. It either explains that, or it explains that there is an intelligent designer who, when he placed it together, understood that every being that lived was going to live in the same biosphere. And if every being that lived was going to live in the same biosphere, then there had to be some similarities for them to be able to live in that biosphere. And so when we come to talking about these transitional forms, and this is one of the greatest problems for Darwinian evolutionists, we hear so much about fossils and missing links. But if you go back and study the fossil record, and Darwin even admitted, if no transitional forms can be found in the fossil record, and he admitted that when he came out with his theory that none had been found, but he believed that in decades and centuries that followed that there would be many transitional fossils that are found. But not one provable fossil link can be found that shows a transitional form, not just from ape to man, but from any species going from one species to another. You say, well, Larry, come on now, that sounds like religious jargon. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen the diagrams of Lucy, and I've seen these archaeological diagrams that they have, and when I go to museums, it shows them. Do you know how those are created? Many of them were created out of a single tooth. The top of the skull, one part of a femur. So what happens is an artist takes that and he creates an artist rendering around that one particular bone. But the issue is that in all of the archaeology we have today, and all of the study of geology, and everything that has been studied in sites all over the world, there is not one verifiable fossil form that can be offered up to be, quote unquote, a missing link of any variety. Now, I would challenge you, in all of the world, with all of the archaeology, could you not produce at least one? They don't exist. So we color our biology graphs and we teach children that this is what has happened and this is how it took place, and we've bought into the lie. So you say, Larry, obviously there's people that fundamentally disagree with you. You're right. So I'm going to ask another question. Why are there still atheists and Darwinists? If what I've told you is correct, why are there still atheists and Darwinists, and why is this still taught predominantly public schools and public universities? The reason that it's taught is because it's religion, not science. Now swallow that for just a moment. It's religion, it's not science. You see, we're always told that we don't need to have the Bible up against science. And let's just, for the sake of argument, say, okay, let's place the Bible to the side for just a moment. Let's not compare the Bible to science. Let's compare good science to bad science. And even if you took the Bible out, even if you had never had a copy of the Bible, Romans 1:20 is saying is, if you are a legitimate thinking scientist and you study any aspect from the biosphere to cosmology to biology to chemistry to physics, and you study all of them, you are left with either the answer to this question: is what I am studying accidental, or is it by design? And if it's by design, this must be one powerful, intelligent designer. It's not science versus religion, it's good science versus bad science. So why are there still atheists and Darwinists? We've circled all the way back around to last week. The aim of evolutionary teaching is not science. It's an assault on the Almighty. It's an effort to remove all God consciousness from individuals and society at large. The fundamental reason for the acceptance of this shift stems from the temptation of our fallen nature to wipe the very idea of God from the heart and mind. Why? So we escape moral accountability, we escape the idea of judgment, and so its logical end becomes unrestrained humanism, hedonism, and materialism. It devalues life, it eliminates purpose, it desecrates dignity, and it removes hope. The abandonment of morality and the social epidemics we face right now are because of the widespread acceptance of evolutionary theory. So, if you were going to have a reasonable faith, I would ask you this. Do you have enough faith to be an atheist? I don't. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And yet, when we look and see the power of God and we see the miracle of creation, we find ourselves in Psalm chapter 103, verse 11. And it says, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is the love of those who fear Him." If you were in a rocket ship and you were traveling 17,000 miles an hour just to get from one star to the next, it would take you over 200,000 years. If the love of God is greater for you than the highest of the heavens, then what that ought to lead you to is this thought: there is a God, and there is a God that I need to know. And the only way that you can know that God is through the promises of Jesus Christ. The love of God is seen clearly on the cross of Jesus Christ. And this is not a designer. This is not a God who just made the world and forgot about it. It's a God that is intimately involved in His creation and who intimately and obsessively loves you. And what you need to know is when you think about the miracles of the cosmos, when you think about the miracles of the biosphere, when you think about the miracles of your own human body, what you realize is, I need to know the God who made me. I need to know the God who loves me. And if that's where you are, you need to bow your head and you need to ask the God of heaven to take control over your life. Would you stand with me?